Thank you to Sue and Kim and Leon for organizing this day and for making it possible for Pat. Welcome, Pat Thompson, a hero of mine, and Pamela Bernard, another hero of mine in this area. We're so fortunate to have them. And last year we had Bill Lucas. Some of you who were here with us last year would remember that, and others who are here today and not here today from the creative arts and creativity's education research community. So I feel very fortunate to have had the chance to have participate in these two creativity summits, because in a way they do follow on, and I think what Sue said is right. It's about trying to build like a sort of an ongoing conversation about it that is about positivity, contribution, and where we might go. And my particular bugbear is around intersectoral conversations, which is partly what the DECRA was focused on, and I think partly why it was funded was because it really had a focus around policy, not just on practice. And I think sometimes too often in education, in all our fields, we look at downward or micro, siloed, insular conversations and foci. And similarly, when I got the DECRA and started talking to other fields and other areas, particularly creative industries, creative and cultural industries, they're over there having a conversation, over there having their conversation. I'm like, where is education in this conversation? And we're not frequently enough or deeply enough or dynamically enough, I think, in conversation with them. And so part of my, it's kind of like the clown car. It's like, how many academics does it take to pull a So there's like all these kind of subliminal tests you're going to encounter today. And it's like, can academics actually stick to a 20-minute keynote? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you the quick overview, but I am so mostly relieved and happy to be able to give you the hard copy of the final report on your chairs today. I think most of you know, or at least you can tell from this front slide, that yes, it has been a 3-year study on creativity, focused primarily in secondary education, but it was funded as an Australian study. And what I did, because I felt like it was an important opportunity, again, to think more synthetically and in more of a networked way about the work that we're doing in secondary, the gap that I saw in secondary creativity education in Australia. And so I didn't want to leave it just at that Australia-based or Australia-only study on that topic, but rather having worked for several years with the work of Professor Bernard and Professor Thompson and Bill Lucas and others in the UK and elsewhere, and saw how much work has already been done in this area, but not as much in secondary focus in Australia. I wanted to make it rather an Australian-centered study that spoke internationally. So what I did was I did a snapshot data collection with 3 other countries, which I'll get to that slide, but it was Singapore, Canada, and the US. And in those countries, it really is a snapshot baseline data, which you'll see in the report. It was really only with teachers and school leaders. It was not with students. So the main difference with Australia, the bulk of the research was here centered in Australia, and that was talking with teachers, students, and school leaders in 6 states. But I'll get to that. Importantly for me, there was a theoretical underpinning. One of the things that I think that we don't always do well, in addition to not speaking laterally or thinking in a networked way around this area, is to think about what the theoretics of creativity education mean and allow us to do, or how they allow us to think more broadly about that. And so my first book on this topic, which I didn't bring today, but it's called The Creative Turn, was really about what I thought was a turn in the discourses of creativity, a commodification of that discourse. And some people have read that book and thought that I meant in it that I thought all creativity or all creative practices should therefore be profitable. I don't believe that. I think that's a silly statement. I myself am an artist. I would never advance that kind of position. But what I was saying was, I think there's a discourse, a neoliberal discourse, that's starting to talk about all creative practices as creative industry. And that means that there is a discourse or a general globalizing conversation that wants all creative practices to be profitable or with an eye toward entrepreneurship. This is core to the discourse of creative industries. It's part of why Justin O'Connor has talked about that separation in the UK between cultural industries and creative industries, which used to be, in his view, in his work, earlier work with creative partnerships, and some of his later work here in Queensland with Cunningham and Flew and others, Erica McWilliam, around the separation of those two things, and in his opinion, the unviability of that. That somehow it becomes a really emaciated creativities or creative industries discourse that is largely digital, and that's not enough. In terms of the Australian context, I'll just say, he says globally, but in terms of the Australian context, to replace the mining economic driver for 21st century Australian economic health, which is sort of how it was being positioned. I think it's moving away from that now. I think people are starting to realize we don't really know what we mean, it's kind of too narrow, we're not sure what else that should include, and so something like Creative Victoria and Creative Australia are starting to recombine those conversations, which I think is a really promising and interesting sign. I'll go back to my first statement, which was, that's great, that's happening, but where's education in that? So let's get education. Not only like Creative Victoria, or some of those organizations going to go and run artisan schools or creative partnerships programs, but actually where are creative and arts teacher educators, higher education theorists, and all the rest of us who are doing tertiary and practice-based work in and with the education sector. Where are all of our voices in the building of that? I think those all have theoretical implications, but also practical, practice-based and policy-based implications as well. But what I started with in this study, can you tell me when I have like 8 minutes left? Teresa Amabile's Keys Protocol. This is sort of where I started in the book originally, so purely theoretical investigation about how people were thinking, writing, and talking about creativity. And then once I started this study about how do I action that? How do I build a survey tool? How do you measure, the age-old question, how do you measure or assess creativities in education, in my case, in the secondary context, which I found was a gap. It led me to Cho, a Korean scholar with a Korean team led by Professor Cho and Bill Lucas in the UK, primarily because they focus specifically on secondary. There are very few studies I found that were particular to secondary, and for me that's a gap, that was an important gap in terms of what I've called education over the, creativity over the education lifespan. So we have robust creativities education in early childhood and primary. We have this renewed kind of creative industries, tertiary funding and development of programs. But secondary, nothing. Why? Because, ATAR, because testing. And I take the position that those are not mutually exclusive imperatives, and that it does reveal a kind of schizophrenia in our cultural and economic vision or thinking when you say that we're going to increasingly standardize the testing that then feeds those students into tertiary study, and somehow miraculously in tertiary study they're going to become creative, innovative workforce participants. It doesn't make sense. So I think that there's a structural change required in secondary. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. So I've drawn on Bernard, on Thompson, and they're extensive, I cannot tell you how thrilled I am that they're here today and how tragic at the same time it is that they can only speak for 20 minutes. But we're so lucky to have them here. And equally, it was interesting to have Bill Lucas here last year and speak about his work, and he continues to work across Australia, mostly in Sydney and here with the Mitchell Institute in Melbourne. Design thinking, also informative, but only fun. Okay, so I decided that I wanted to do a mixed method study because I was tired of people talking about qualitative not being valid sample. Probably don't need to say more to this crowd about that, but that's why I chose it. And then there I was, having moved over quite solidly into the dark side, running surveys about creativity. What a strange place to find oneself in. Nevertheless, I thought I made a good effort at 681 surveys. In fact, I had something like, I think it was, it's in the report, 747 surveys with the help of my amazing program coordinator and RA. But I mean, I'm telling you, I did all the interviews myself. I did all the focus groups myself. 6 states and territories, 2 to 3 schools in each state, and then internationally as well. So you can see the numbers there. I'm tired. I am so tired. I have no respect for large-scale researchers. It's really hard. And then I had a wonderful quant guy who was working with me to analyze those surveys. So, you know, I made mistakes. It was a great learning curve about, you know, you can do a survey and it still can be filled with qualitative questions. Who knew? Anyway, I learned a lot. But, you know, I got some data that I do think is of value to the field, at least I hope it is. And I did have a lot of fun as well. I have to say, every time it was like time to fly to a new state or, you know, location, I was like, oh God, I can't do this anymore. And I've spoken now on this study so many times, right? The only, you know, the benefit of that is I didn't have a lot of prep for today to do, because it's like I'd probably be in the nursing home, you know, like, it's like, you know, housewives are like, but I must make dinner, you know, I'll be like, just 3 more servings. It's just like in my brain. But I do have to say, every time I was feeling kind of like hopeless and full of despair about having to get back on the plane, I'd get to a school and it would be like horrible weather and you're trudging in the rental car and all that, and then I'd go and I'd sit down with these teachers and I'm just like, it was just moving. It was so inspiring and so moving, and people are so committed to their practice and they're not asked enough about their practice, and they're so happy to share that information, that expert knowledge they've had, and their dreams and hopes for how school could be, and their relationships and conversations with their students, and many times their principals. And even the principals I gained lots of new understanding and appreciation for, understanding that they too feel constrained by these systems and want to change and feel in many ways that they themselves are powerless as well. It was a privilege to be able to have this time to do it, and I do thank the ARC for that. That said, and this is for another time, it might be worth, within the SIG or some other kind of mechanism, one thing I haven't gone and talked a lot about, in fact, I don't think I've talked at all about, is like how we, in this work, which is not valued, right, economically possibly, or at least through the ARC, I would assert that, how we can help each other and advise each other on how to get these grants. Because it's so necessary, and just seeing how much data that's generated, and also like how my own theoretical and practice-based work advanced. So, you know, I think rapidly have the privilege to focus only on this. I just wish everyone could have these opportunities, and I think it's not because I am a kind of obsessive book writer or article writer or any of those other things that people think are the reason I got it. I really think it's things like because I coded as policy and like how to phrase things, and like I think we could do a lot more to help one another get this kind of, not only ARC, but these kinds of fundings that allow us to do this work, and especially internationally, collaboratively, to do that work. So if anybody wants to talk about that, or maybe look at another event or panel on those kinds of issues, I think it's really, really important. You've probably all read that slide while I was crapping out, so I can. Okay. All right. Sample qualitative question. This is the kind of analysis that I did in collaboration with Hongji Zhen, who's an amazing quant researcher in our faculty of education at Monash. Thank God for Hongji. So these are kind of interesting things, but also, you know, like, and I know Magna McClure and other people have written about that beauty of the data, right? Like analyzing the data, and I just went, yeah, okay, sure. Lifetime academics, what they find fun. But you know what, actually it is really amazing when you look at things like, you know, what the students, I should go back, like what the students say or what the literature says is the most important thing to create the, because my whole approach was an environmental approach to looking at creativities in schools, right? Should have said that. Most of the research looks at individual capacity or teaching and learning practices, right? Creative pedagogy. Right in the beginning, I wrote to Pat and I was talking about what I wanted to do, and she was like, listen, it's not about creative pedagogy. Like, what do you mean? It's a word. What do you care? You know? But actually, you know, there's a lot of research around whether this kind of work is approached as creative pedagogies, whether it's approached as creative learning and teaching, right? And these are huge bodies of work that are fascinating and well developed, mostly, in my opinion, through the UK. You might feel differently. So I really was, when I wrote that first book, looking at what is it? Because to me, I had been reading a lot, you know, there was like this very rapid proliferation of literature around creativity, but it wasn't in education. It was in economics. It was in neuroscience. It was in all the things you guys know about and have heard about. And that's how I found Teresa Amabile and Tina Seelig and other people like that. And I was like, you know, a lot of what they were talking about was an environmental approach. It's the Google, it's the Pixar analyses, right? It's like, what makes a creative workplace? And I felt, it just happens to be my own particular fascination with the subject, that we can, as teacher educators, we can do lots of things, and I am with colleagues, to try and make mandatory creativity units in teacher education programs. I think those things all need to happen. We can do PDs with existing teachers and so on to raise their comfort level. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, as most of you know, with creativity. But at the end of the day, if we're sending teachers out or sending established teachers back into schools that are structurally incompatible with or hostile to creative practices or productive risk-taking, and any of the other top 10 things or top 50 things that research indicates are required for creativity and innovation or creative approaches or creative gestation, it's never going to happen. It doesn't matter how comfortable the teachers are with it, in my opinion, if the environment is hostile to that. And that is a lot of what the principals shared with me when I was there. It's all well and good, we want this to happen, we'd love to have you come and do that or someone else, we've done all these things, but then a week later, it's back to business as usual. So one of the interesting things for me about the quant data was that what the research indicates is required environmentally, and what the students and teachers and principals said didn't match at all. So what the kids wanted most of all often matched, and the teachers too, often matched what the research indicated, but they were indicated as the least common in evidence in the school environment. So those are things that I wouldn't have known through a qual study only. I'm going to jump ahead. You can read all this in the thing if you're interested. I developed a couple of tools. I started out thinking tools were for chumps. I just sort of thought creativity measurements and tools, bah humbug. And by the end, I sort of thought, that's not really fair because people are overcommitted with the work of their school environments, and they need tools. Why would I expect people to go and reinvent the wheel? And it's not incompatible. You can start with a tool, and then of course still make it contextually specific, change and alter it, purpose fit it to your environment. So I came up with a couple of things. They're in the report. I don't need to go over them here. But the Harris Creativity Index really was trying to talk about an environmental approach, which I eventually came to call a creative ecology of the school, or the ecosystem of the school. And I guess the point that I was really trying to make in that was no one tool, no one tweetable phrase, no one particular expert coming to your school for a day-long PD is going to solve this problem or change the culture of the school. I do think that it's a whole school kind of audit is required, and if you think about it in design thinking, or the creative ecologies is not a phrase I made up, if you think about it in terms of the ecosystem, then people will naturally take an environmental approach. And so yes, attention to creative teaching and learning, yes, attention to environmental conditions, yes, attention to the physical plant of the school, and so on. So I guess that's, how am I going? I'm done, I'm finished. Get off, where's the hook? Get her off. That's my main contribution. But I do hope that the large data set provides the Australian context research community with data that you can use. Because we know that we've had that challenge in the past where people want to challenge us on not a large enough valid data set. So I'll leave it there. I hope that's helpful, and thank you for listening.